Afternoon, friends and members of St. Martin Lutheran Church. This is Pastor Jim Chinnery. Today is Wednesday, July 29th. I got to make sure I look at the right thing. I have the camera. I'm used to looking, before I would look at the laptop, that's where my camera was, but I have a new camera, so now I have to do this. So I'm kind of getting used to that. So if you see my eyes darting all around, that's just because I don't know where to look. So welcome. I hope you're having a good day today. A nice sunny day here in Birch Run again. Blue skies, a few clouds. Certainly a nice day for a walk, or a nice day to maybe do something outside. I've only been outside to walk from my house to the car and the car to the church, and had the great opportunity to visit with someone this morning. I'm not going to say their name. They are free to say their name. I didn't get permission, so I don't want to call anyone out, but it's nice to be able to, I feel like, once again begin visiting people in their homes, and some people are still reluctant to have visitors into their homes, and I certainly understand that, as well as people are still reluctant to come to church. And again, we support your decision to stay home, and we only ask that you communicate with us and how we can best serve your needs. And I'd ask too, for those who are able to watch this live stream, who and know people and talk to people who perhaps don't have access to technology like this, share with them as well. If they're in need of spiritual care or visits, to communicate with us in some fashion, and we'll do our best to meet that spiritual need. So our reading for today is Psalm 136, a very interesting psalm. A little longer psalm, but you'll kind of see why. Throughout the psalm is this refrain that gets repeated over and over again, and it's a good refrain. It's a good thing to have stuck in your brain. Now, before we read Psalm 136, a couple notes. From the Jewish Talmud. Now, the Jewish Talmud is it's not scripture. It's their body of ceremonial law and rabbi commentaries on various things of scripture and life. It would kind of be close to our, for Lutherans, what we would know as our Book of Concord, right? But from the Jewish Talmud, this is what we read. Psalm 136 equates the most awesome divine miracles. For example, he divided the Red Sea into two parts, with the apparently mundane and routine task of providing for daily sustenance. He gives bread to all living creatures. This teaches that the provision of daily sustenance is as significant as the splitting of the sea. And what a great thought that we would, a lot of us, especially those of us who don't have to worry about daily bread, right, would consider daily bread as being not that big of a deal. And of course, the splitting of the Red Sea for the Israelites to pass through after the Exodus to be a big deal. But Psalm 136 lifts those up as equally miraculous, the parting of the Red Sea and the providing for daily bread. And the Talmud as well calls Psalm 136 the great Hallel. Hallel, the Hebrew word for praise, right? The great psalm of praise, because it underscores God's most enduring achievement, and that his most enduring achievement is the sustaining of all living things, of creation. This psalm begins with a call to praise and a call to give thanks in the first three verses, and then it's followed by a recalling of God's work of creation in verses 4 to 9, and then the events of the Exodus, the guiding through the wilderness, the conquest of the Promised Land. Verses 10 to 22, and this is this interesting section where the speaker changes, and it goes from talking about God to us. So in a sense, beginning with verse 23 in the end, we're sort of included in this story. We begin by remembering the great deeds of God, and then we're included into this wonderful story. So Psalm 136. Give thanks to the Lord, for he is good, for his steadfast love endures forever. Give thanks to the God of gods, for his steadfast love endures forever. Give thanks to the Lord of lords, for his steadfast love endures forever. To him who alone does great wonders, for his steadfast love endures forever. To him by who understanding made the heavens, for his steadfast love endures forever. To him who spread out the earth above the waters, for his steadfast love endures forever. To him who made the great lights, for his steadfast love endures forever. The sun to rule over the day, for his steadfast love endures forever. The moon and stars to rule over the night, for his steadfast love endures forever. To him who struck down the firstborn of Egypt, for his steadfast love endures forever, and brought Israel out from among them, for his steadfast love endures forever. With a strong hand and an outstretched arm, for his steadfast love endures forever. To him who divided the Red Sea in two, for his steadfast love endures forever, and made Israel pass through the midst of it, for his steadfast love endures forever, but overthrew Pharaoh and his host in the Red Sea, for his steadfast love endures forever. To him who led his people through the wilderness, for his steadfast love endures forever. To him who struck down great kings, for his steadfast love endures forever, and killed mighty kings, for his steadfast love endures forever. Sihon, king of the Amorites, for his steadfast love endures forever. And Og, king of Bashan, for his steadfast love endures forever. And gave their land as a heritage, for his steadfast love endures forever. A heritage to Israel his servant, for his steadfast love endures forever. It is he who remembered us in our low estate, for his steadfast love endures forever, and rescued us from our foes, for his steadfast love endures forever. He who gives food to all flesh, for his steadfast love endures forever. Give thanks to the God of heaven, for his steadfast love endures forever. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. So what did you take away from that psalm? Hopefully, at the very least, his steadfast love endures forever and ever. And this psalm, it's believed that this psalm was designed to be read or sung or chanted in a responsory manner, where you would have a leader or a chanter sing the first part, and then the rest of the congregation would respond, and you could see how that would work well in a responsory prayer. And the statement in verse 1, his steadfast love endures forever. We find this throughout Scripture. And the word the Hebrew word is hesed. Hesed, that gets translated, his steadfast love endures forever. And a good equivalent for hesed or steadfast love is amazing grace. Now, one book in the Old Testament where hesed pops up a lot, and not only does the word referring to God's steadfast love come up frequently, but it's a good descriptor of what really is at the root of that word. In the book of Hosea, we see that word hesed, God's steadfast love, coming up over and over again, which means, that the love and loyalty that ought to exist between a husband and a wife. That's the word that God uses to describe his relationship to Israel, that Christ uses to describe his relationship to the church. And if you know anything about the book of Hosea, he got a lesson in what that steadfast love meant. That it's the model for understanding God's love for Israel and Christ's love for the church, as a man loves a woman and they are united in one flesh, and through sickness and in health until death parts. That's the model, steadfast love. And so when we get to verse 4, we read about the story of God's work in creation. So the first 3 verses are this call to praise. And then and it talks about God's work in creation. And the Hebrew word that's translated wonders, in verse 4 it begins, to him alone who does great wonders, right? That the Hebrew word for that is nipleot. And it can refer to a number of things that are beyond our realm of understanding. Um, and and it's a reference as well as for the people of God to be in awe of the Lord, his nipleot, his wonders. And it's interesting, in speaking that same word wonders in Proverbs 28, we read, three things are too wonderful for me, four I do not understand. So the author of this proverb is saying there's three things that are too wonderful for me, and the fourth one I don't understand. The way of the eagle in the sky, the way of the serpent on a rock, the way of a ship on the high seas. That they're too wonderful, like I can't get my mind around it. It's nipleot. It's one of the wonders of God that I will never fully comprehend, but certainly can be in awe at. And then beginning in verse 10, we get this summary of God's act in history, specifically with the children of Israel. And it lists a series of the Lord's wondrous deeds, where he struck down the firstborn of Egypt, where he brought Israel from among them, divided the Red Sea, and made Israel pass through it, overthrew Pharaoh in the same sea, led his people through the wilderness, struck down great kings, and the king of the Amorites and the king of Bashan are mentioned specifically, and gave them a land as a heritage to Israel, his servant, in verse 22. And that ends that little section of the story of God's act in history. So we're reading about what God has done. And then in verse 23, there's this shift. It is he who remembered us. That's where it shifts to us. That's where, in a sense, we enter the story. We weren't part of Israel's history, of course, but we enter the story now. And now, for the first time, the community singing this psalm appears. It's kind of like if you're looking at pictures, and people will tend to do this. You try to find yourself in the picture, right? If you're looking through pictures, and you're throwing through them, and well, there I am, right? We finally find ourselves in the psalm, and so first the worshipers gathered here to sing this psalm, Psalm 136. Recall how the Lord had helped them in a time of trouble. And then they remember how often the Lord had rescued them from their enemies. And these recollections of the people bring the stories of God's mighty acts up to date and right with us here and today. And then finally, the community together recalls how God provides food for all creatures. For all creatures. And again, as I mentioned earlier from the Talmud, Psalm 136 puts the gift of daily food on the same plane as the mighty acts of creation. Exodus and conquest, all of these are workings out of God's amazing grace. Oh, give thanks to the Lord, for he is good. His steadfast love endures forever. That prayer is as appropriate for an individual at home praying over a plate of food as it is for people who have escaped freedom from slavery. And in both cases, the prayers are exceptions of thankful and grateful hearts, amazed that the God of heaven cares about people, and cares about you. As David once wrote, "Oh, Lord, what am I? Who am I that you would have any concern for me?" And yet he does. And yet he does. So in that vein, the hymn I chose today, this is not an easy melody. And that was confirmed. I had that confirmed. I've been practicing this song and practicing it. And I went to Stephanie and I said, is this song difficult or is it just me in my tone deafness? And she confirmed this is a difficult psalm. So I know I'm making excuses before I start singing. I got to stop doing that, right? But this song, I heard the voice of Jesus say, was written by a guy by the name of Horatius Bonner. And he was a godly minister of Christ, born in Scotland in 1808. His public ministry began about 22 years later. He was known as a preacher who preached with energy but was especially gifted at house-to-house visitation, providing comfort for the sorrowful and guidance for the perplexed. He was a pastor. That's what a pastor does. In the church today, sometimes pastors have all other kinds of jobs to do, right? Administrators, finances, all that stuff. And I'm not saying those things are unimportant, but it's a good reminder for me as well that one of these paragons of the faith, Horatius Bonar, who wrote many, many different hymns, his focus was on biblical preaching and making sure the sorrowful and the perplexed are visited when needed. Now, this particular song as well has a little bit of a story behind it. I heard the voice of Jesus say, and Horatius Bonar wrote this hymn after a trip to Palestine. And he wrote this. He wrote, "One dark night in the year 1856 in the city of Jerusalem, I wandered into a lighted mission room on Mount Zion where a small company of men and women of various nationalities and complexions were gathered. At the desk was a man of impressive countenance, low and musical voice. This man, the preacher, I learned, was Dr. Horatius Bonar. Learned and eloquent, with a wonderful charm, he had strong convictions in being in Palestine that the Lord was going to come. He believed in his personal coming, that he was going to reign on earth, and his faith, seconded by his rich poetic imagination and fervor, quickened by the fact that they were in Jerusalem, the city of the Passion, gave power to this hymn." And he had originally entitled this hymn "A Voice from Galilee," and later, I think maybe later the church had retitled it "I Heard the Voice of Jesus Say." But this was his inspiration, was going to Palestine and being and visiting the places where Jesus preached and taught and was ascended into heaven. I heard the voice of Jesus say. I have to have a longer intro so I know where I am. I heard the voice of Jesus say, "Come unto me and rest. Lay down the weary one, lay down thy head upon my breast." I came to Jesus as I was, so weary, worn, and sad. I found in him a resting place, and he has made me glad. I heard the voice of Jesus say, "Behold, I freely give the living water, thirsty one, stoop down and drink and live." I came to Jesus as I drank of that life-giving stream. My thirst was quenched, my soul revived, and now I live in him. I heard the voice of Jesus say, "I am this dark world's light. Look unto me, thy morn shall rise, and all thy day be bright." I looked to Jesus, and I found in him my star, my sun. And in that light of life I'll walk till traveling days are done. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious unto you. The Lord look upon you with favor and give you peace. I hope you enjoyed that hymn. I really like it. It's one I'm going to work on too, because it certainly is an appropriate hymn for those who are in distress and in need of comfort. So receive the Lord's blessing. Be a blessing to others. I love you guys very much, and I hope to see you all very soon, and have a wonderful day.